On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program Lawrence Lessig. He is a professor at Harvard Law School, director of the Edmund Safra Center for Ethics, and founder of the Mayday PAC at mayday.us. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Sam.
Now, we've talked many times over the years, and I still remember speaking to you, I don't know how long ago it was, when you had made the decision after the developing things like the Creative Commons license to dedicate your energies to figuring out a way to fix our broken democracy. And if I recall correctly, this was before Citizens United. And even at that time, you had come to the conclusion that the problems, that the central, I guess, fulcrum of our problems in American politics was money. It may seem obvious to people now, but just give us a sense of why that's the case.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's money simply. It's the problem with our current system is the way campaigns raise their money. So members of Congress spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money from the tiniest fraction of the 1% of us. I did a calculation for my book which found that the relevant funders, the funders, who give it a level that members actually care about, are no more than about 150,000 Americans, which is about the same number of people as are named Lester in the United States. So the Lesters of the United States are funding the campaigns, and members of Congress spend all of their time trying to figure out how to persuade them to fund their campaigns. And that dynamic produces a Congress that's not representative or reflective of what the people want. They are overly sensitive and bending to give the funders what they want. And that creates the core corruption that makes it impossible for our government to do anything.
And I want to get into the specific candidates raising money and the way they go about raising money. But what of outside expenditures? I mean, this is becoming, obviously, in the wake of Citizens United and in the wake of other sort of chipping away at campaign finance, this has become an increasing problem as well. I mean, I remember speaking to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and he was explaining that, part of this dynamic, too, is not even the money that you raise, but the idea that someone can walk into your office and say, hey, I just want you to know we're heavily invested in this vote, and if you vote the wrong way, we're going to dump $3 million into your district to make sure that you don't get elected.
Yeah, that dynamic is poisonous because what it does is it leads everyone to begin to line up with big money on their side so that they actually have somebody to defend them if they get attacked by people on the other side. So that problem, this is the problem created by super PACs, is something that we have to address as well. And I actually think the court is going to come around and fix that problem with super PACs. But the thing to keep in view is that even if the court made super PACs or upheld limits on super PACs, we still would have a system where the tiniest fraction of the 1% was funding the campaigns. And the only way we're ever going to fix the democracy that we've got right now, which is basically incapable of doing anything, is to change the way that we fund campaigns. And there's lots of different ways to think about how to do that, to spread out the funder influence so it's not just this tiny fraction of the 1%, but that's got to be the focus of the democratic work, to get a Congress that will actually pass fundamental reform here by 2016.
All right. Well, so let's dig into this, because you wrote a piece, I guess it was last week, on why this needs to be cross-partisan, and you raised this notion of that Democrats are generally talk a good game, but when push comes to shove, they either don't have the political power, or, frankly, they don't have the political will once they're in office. And I wonder from your perspective, I mean, talk about that for a moment, because I want to dig into that. People need to understand sort of the premise of this notion that it has to be cross-partisan.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that our Congress is now so deeply partisan, just like media is so deeply partisan, that they only think about things in terms of what will help them in their partisan agenda. What will help them raise money for their party so that they can get more seats in Congress, maybe get control of a House again. And depending on which party you're in, that is good news for your party. But if you're talking about this kind of reform, this kind of fundamental reform that will change the way our political system functions, the only way that can ever happen is if it's cross-partisan. So, right now the Democrats are pushing this constitutional amendment by Senator Udall that would reestablish Congress's power to limit contributions and limit expenditures in political elections. And this amendment has 0 Republican co-sponsors, and indeed no Republican has co-sponsored any of the amendments that are trying to address Citizens United. So when Senator Reid brings this up on the floor of the Senate, which he's intending to do in August, and force a vote on it, this issue is, of course, catnip to the Democratic base. The Democrats will love it. They'll get really excited about it. They'll be celebrating the fact that, somebody's trying to do something about Citizens United. But it's not actually moving the ball of reform, because, that action will actually harden the partisan divide on this issue. It won't lessen it. And it'll make it harder to think about the conversation that actually brings Republicans into the coalition necessary to pass an amendment, because, an amendment takes 67 votes in the United States Senate, and that means at least a dozen Republicans would have to join a unanimous Democratic vote, which, right now is just impossible to imagine. So the point is that we've got to find a way to build a movement that is not tied to the partisan interest of the Democrats or the Republicans, but instead leverages off the public's recognition that this existing system is broken, and we've got to find a different way to fund campaigns so it doesn't so drastically defeat the objectives of the people and what Congress actually does.
Do you see I mean, obviously, okay, this is obviously not going to pass. Like you say, you need 67 votes in the Senate and then votes in the House. And do you see this as detrimental, or is there any value in terms of raising the issue? I mean, I guess from when I contemplate other measures that I want to see our government adopt, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing to have, let's say, a vote that I know is going to fail. I'm just using as an example, expansion of Social Security. This is not going to happen in the near term, but I think that there's value in it being raised in any way possible, because it begins to expand the playing field of what people converse about and contemplate. Do you see no value to that at all?
I'm not saying there's no value, and in fact, I'm saying, I'm a Democrat. I like the idea of the Democrats getting lots of money to run their elections. But what I'm saying is it's not strategically useful for advancing the objective of bringing about reform of the system, if indeed you've got to bring about reform that's going to be cross-partisan. So, instead of talking about what is an impossible task, passing a constitutional amendment, meaning getting a dozen Republicans to join you to get it out to the states, and then once it's in the states, you've got to get 3/4 of the states to pass it. There are plenty of bills in Congress right now that would bring about a radical change in the way elections are funded that don't require a constitutional amendment. John Sarbanes in the House has a bill called the Government by the People Act, which has more than 155 co-sponsors right now. This bill would create a system of small dollar elections, so public funding to support small dollar elections. So if you give $100 to a candidate who chooses to run her campaign with small contributions only, that gets matched 9-1. so that candidates could have the option of running for Congress without relying on the contributions of the tiniest fraction of the 1%, but instead relying on small contributions and therefore not becoming beholden to any tiny little interest that forces them to think of issues in one particular way versus another. There's a Republican version of this idea, too, that imagines vouchers for small contributions, vouchers to support small dollar-funded candidates that voters would get. They would hand out parts of it to whatever candidate they like. But once again, it would be a way of funding elections without relying on the tiny fraction of the 1% to fund it. My point is this is actually the kind of solution we could imagine bringing about if we had real leadership focused on the solution as opposed to focused on the kind of perpetual partisan war that defines what happens inside of Washington.
And this Sarbanes proposal specifically is not unlike what we have in New York City, in fact, and we were hoping to have in New York State, but sadly that's not happening in the near term, it appears. Professor, can you hang with me through the break, because we've got a lot more to talk about on this.
Sure.
All right, great. We'll be right back with Professor Lawrence Lessig about his Mayday PAC at mayday.us. And, of course, the professor is the author of Republic Lost, How Money Corrupts Congress, and a Plan to Stop It. We'll be back in a sec. We are speaking with Professor Lawrence Lessig. He is the author of Republic Lost, How Money Corrupts Congress, and a Plan to Stop It. He is the founder of Mayday PAC, which you can find at mayday.us. To date, my understanding is that you've raised over $3 million with about over 15,000 contributions. And Professor, when we broke, we were talking about the fallacy that a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United is really doable, and that if we want to do something doable here, we have to support the passage of statute in the House and I guess the Senate that would provide sort of opt-in opportunities for mostly matching funds or perhaps a voucher system where people could earmark part of their taxes to campaigns. And when we broke, I was suggesting that that's similar to a system that we have in New York. Why do you think that is it simply that those have more of a chance of passage because the bar is just lower?
Yeah, the bar is lower. And if we could get a Congress that was committed to this kind of reform, and we passed it, then we would begin to bring people into Congress who would be interested in bigger reform, like constitutional change. So, what the Mayday PAC is doing is we've got a two-cycle strategy. In this cycle, 2014, we're running a pilot campaign in 5 races to demonstrate people will vote on the basis of this issue. They will throw out candidates or incumbents who are not supportive of reform, so that the message becomes clear in Washington that this is an issue people care about, and therefore people in Washington begin to line up on the right side of this issue. But this is just the pilot for a much bigger campaign in 2016, where our objective is to elect a Congress, majority of Congress committed to this kind of fundamental reform, so that the first thing they do in 2017 is to pass that reform, so that the next president has a chance to actually do something, as opposed to what we've seen Obama stuck with in this current stage of what Francis Fukuyama calls the veto-ocracy, or the vetocracy of the United States government, which basically is incapable of doing anything, I believe, because of the way we fund campaigns.
So I have a couple of questions about this strategy. In 2012, my understanding is the Friends of Democracy PAC had at least a similar agenda. You could tell me if it's different, but that's my understanding. And they got elected, I think, 7 of 8 of their candidates. How many, assuming you get all 5 here that you're aiming for, and are they? Are you planning to do this on Democrats and Republican? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So we're going to be in 5 races we haven't named the races yet, but it's certainly there's certainly Republican opportunities to make an intervention that gets us to the place we need to be in 2016, which is that Democrats and Republicans both are supporting this kind of change. Now, what we're doing is similar to what Friends of Democracy did. Friends of Democracy is doing something in 2014 too. They're going to be in more races. What we're trying to do is to complement their strategy by trying to be in fewer races, but being in these races at a much higher level, so that when we get finished with this election cycle in January 2015, we can all sit down and we can look at what the data shows works. Like, what does it really take to convince people that we can win on this issue? Because I believe that if we can show people who care about reform real data to support the idea we can have real change, then we can raise the funds necessary in 2016 to bring about that kind of change.
Is this going to require from activists on both sides of the aisle? But I think most of the people listening to this program tend to vote Democratic or a candidate perhaps to the left. But is this going to require that people basically eat it on other issues? In other words, does this have to be for people the primary single issue vote? I assume that's what it is for you guys. But to show that this can work and then ultimately to carry it through to its completion in 2016, does this have to be like the single issue?
Well, I wouldn't try to persuade people to give up, the other issues that really motivates them. So if you care about climate change, then, I wouldn't say give up your work on climate change. But I think what people have got to recognize is that unless we get this issue fixed, then none of these other substantive issues people care about, whether it's climate change or the debt or tax reform or whatever, are ever going to get sensibly addressed in our current political system. So we need to take enough energy from these other movements to make it possible for us to build this reform movement. And with that reform movement, when it's successful in getting a Congress that passes the fundamental reform, then it will be possible to pass the kind of changes that one wants in the context of, for example, climate change is the issue that's so important to me. And I think that people are constantly saying, no, we got to deal with the substantive issue. That's the really important thing. But look, we're going to go through 8 years of the Obama administration, and not one single substantive statute will have been passed to address in a fundamental way the problem of climate change. An issue which in 2008, both parties basically admitted was an issue that had to be addressed. By the end of this two-term administration, it will not have been addressed, and it will never be addressed so long as the entities which make more than $100 billion in profit every year, given the current unregulated system, have the ability to leverage that profit to stop reform. So we've got to change. Lawrence Lessig,
the site is mayday.us. For the Mayday PAC, we will touch base with you again as we get closer to that election. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Sam.
Sam Seder here. Can't catch Ring of Fire live? Sign up for the podcast and listen to me whenever you want. Go to ringofireradio.com. Get CD quality audio with no commercials. Plus, new subscribers get all 6 days of the show. It's just $7.95 a month, but sign up now for the year and it's only $4.95 a month. So save money and get more of me. Go to ringofireradio.com. Support Ring of Fire and Progressive Talk Radio, folks. Go to ringofireradio.com and sign up now.